Hi there, this is Jen, and thanks for joining me. Today I am having a little bit of fun with tissue paper. This is Spectra Art tissue, which I purchased from Amazon probably about a year or so ago, but going through my craft room, I noticed it and I thought I would go ahead and pull it out and make some card backgrounds. So this tissue paper is specifically for bleeding the color. So more than likely your regular packaging, like present packaging tissue paper, will not work for this. It does not have the pigment. So this is basically water reactive tissue paper. And this pack that I bought has 100 sheets, 25 colors. It's got a ton in it. And for this first card, I'm going to go ahead and use some Bristol Smooth cardstock along with this heavy doodle stencil called Bubble Waves. And then the tissue paper that I'm using is a piece of yellow and then two different shades of orange. And you can tear this, cut it. I think, use my scissors to cut some squares, and then I end up tearing that to use with my stencil. And so I'm just going to take my Bristol paper and spritz it with water. And then I will take the stencil and lay that on top. And then I'm just going to take the tissue paper and just set it over the stencil in random areas. If you wanted to, you could use the stencil spray to get a little better image from the stencil, but I didn't do that for this card. I just kind of wanted it a little more loose or organic, I guess. And so I'm just spreading the tissue paper till the entire card panel is covered, and then I'm going to spritz that with water again. And this probably wasn't a great choice of paper for so much water. I mean, Bristol will take a lot of water, but I should have used a watercolor paper for this instead. So I'm just taking my brayer and trying to push that color into the card or into the paper. And then with a little bit of the excess ink that has come off the tissue paper, I'm just taking my paintbrush and splattering that over the card. And just a side note, this will stain your fingers fairly well. It will come off with warm soap and water, but like I tried wiping it off with a baby tissue wipe and it wouldn't come off. So if you don't like to get your hands inky, then I would suggest wearing gloves. For this next card panel, I'm going to go ahead and try to do a little bit of watercoloring and stamping. So I have a stamp set off to the left side. That's my favorite thing stamp set called Painted Flowers. And so I'm trying to kind of follow the shape of those flowers. And I have 3 shades of tissue paper, which I have spritzed with water. And then I'm just taking my paintbrush and dipping it into the tissue paper to bring that color over. And just like with most things, the darker tissue papers have a lot more pigment in them than the lighter tissue paper. So the darker tissue papers are going to show up and be able to be able to get a lot more color from them than you are from the lighter ones. So next I'm going to take a stamp and just kind of push that into the tissue paper to get some of that ink up on the stamp, and then stamp that up. And then I'm taking a paintbrush to try and move the color a little bit. It does not move that well once it's down on the paper. It will bleed if I spray it, but it did not move that well when I tried to move it with my paintbrush. So here I am taking the lighter color of blue and I'm going to try and stamp that one up as well. And it did not stamp up real well at all. And then so I'm going to go back with a bigger stamp and try that same color. And I'm just pushing it over the previous stamp that I had done, and it kind of fills in a little more of those colors. And then here I'm just taking different stamps, kind of experimenting to see what will work. And then I'll go ahead and take my green tissue paper and draw some stems on the leaves. Some stems on the flowers. And then once I have all of the stems drawn in, I'll go ahead and take some of that excess ink that's on my craft mat and use my paintbrush to splatter that across the card. And then I do pull out my Catherine Pooler inks to use to take some of those kind of flower centers that are in the stamp set to give the flowers a little more character or design. And the colors I'm using are It's a Boy and Stone Blue. And towards the end of the video, I show you a little bit of putting the cards together and the completed cards. And so for this next card, I'm going to do, actually I do 2 rainbow cards. I do one that's a little bit looser than the other one. So this one that I'm doing first is going to be a really loose kind of watercolor rainbow background. And I believe I'm using the Arteza watercolor paper. So again, I spritz the panel with water before I start. And then I'm just kind of ripping strips. I don't have this calculated. As you can probably see, when I get to the bottom, I kind of run out of room because I have put my strips so thick. But you can cut them all a uniform size as well. And then once I have them cut, I go ahead and spritz that with water. And then I pull up a little bit of the water. You could also take another piece of paper and put that over and make an extra panel. And then I'm going to go ahead and spritz that again and try taking my brayer to kind of push that color into the cardstock. And I'm going to pull that off, and I didn't have enough color, so I went ahead and I took some strips and laid a little bit back on and then spritzed with water to get that color to move around. So the purple one you can't really see. I do 2 rainbow cards. The purple is really, really light, and there's not a darker purple color, amazingly, in this set of tissue paper. So here I am is just taking the strips again and adding a little bit more pigment to my panel. And then I'll go ahead and get that dried up. And that will complete this background for this card. So for the next rainbow, I'm doing a little more controlled rainbow. So I spritz the panel first and then lay the color down. And then I'll take my heat tool and dry that. And then I will pull that strip of tissue paper up so you can see it's a little more defined as far as the colors. They don't bleed into each other too much. So I'll just complete this process using all of the colors. Spritz the paper and then lay the color strip down, and then take my heat tool and dry that and then pull the strip up. And it gives a lot more of a kind of more organized rainbow, I guess, than the first rainbow. For the next one, I am using die cuts. So what I've done is I've taken this Altenew stamp set and die set called Wispy Begonia, and I am using some leftover pieces of Arteza watercolor cardstock. And what I've done is I've just taken the tissue paper and used the floral die cut from this stamp set to die cut the flowers out and the leaves. And it's kind of hard to tell, but I've used 2 different shades of pink and then 2 shades of green for the leaves. And I'm just going to take the tissue paper and dip it in water and then lay it onto my cardstock. You can also just lay the tissue paper on the cardstock and wet it. I just didn't want the entire panel to be wet, and so that's why I did it this way. And so I'll go ahead and do that for all of the pieces of tissue paper. I let this dry a little bit, and then I help it out with my heat tool. So it just leaves kind of like a stamp, like you've watercolored a background or stamped a background, I guess. And then I'll go ahead and take my Catherine Pooler inks in Lime Ricky and Be Mine. So I use Lime Ricky for the leaves. I only end up using the lighter color of green leaves rather than kind of the more of the teal colored. And I am taking one of the stamps that matches up with the die from the stamp set and going over the leaves and the florals. And then I'll go ahead and use the die cut and cut these images out. And then I set those pieces aside until I assemble the card towards the end of the video. So for the next card, I am doing an entire panel of color. And so what I've done is I've taken a piece of my Arteza watercolor paper or cardstock and spritzed it with water. And then I'm just taking a full panel of yellow and laying that over the cardstock. And then I take my brayer, which had some leftover ink from the previous, from when I used it previously on these panels, and it left a little bit of kind of a different color transferred onto it, which I think looks fine, so I went ahead and left it. But this was a really super quick panel to do. And again, at the end of the video, I will show you the completed card. For this next one, I'm going to create my own shimmer mist using this dark piece of kind of magenta tissue paper. And I'm just taking a little spray bottle and taking my spray bottle and just spraying some water in there till it's about halfway full. And then I'm going to take some Perfect Pearls in white and scoop just a little bit. You don't need a whole lot of the Perfect Pearls to make the mist. If you have mica or any kind of powder like that you can mix in with that will work. So I'm just going to put a little bit of that in the little spray bottle and kind of move that around and get that mixed up. And then I'm just going to take the tissue paper and fold it up and not totally submerge it into my spray bottle, but just put the tip of it in. And I guess if I could have done this another way, I could have gone ahead and put the mica in last and just fill the water bottle up with water and then put my tissue paper in there and let that color get moved around. But since I already put the mica in, I just went ahead and put the end of the tissue paper into the water bottle and just held that at the top and just used my sprayer and let that tissue paper bleed into the water. And then once I have the color that I want, I'm going to go ahead and just put that top on that mister and shake that around. And for this card panel, I went ahead and I embossed in some silver embossing powder this floral image from Pink Fresh Studios. And then I'm just going to take that mist that I created and spray it over the card panel. And the color is really muted and very light, so I go ahead and dry it with my heat tool and then spray it again to get that color to darken up a little bit. But if you wanted a darker color, you might just want to take the tissue paper and soak it in your mister until it darkens up a little bit. You might be able to get a little more pigment out of the paper that way. So for this next panel, I'm going to try and do some stamping again. And I have taken several little swatches of tissue paper, and one in pink, one in red, and one in green. And I am using this stamp from Honeybee Stamps called Heartfelt. And I've already wet down the tissue paper, and so I'm just going to take my stamp and press that into the wet tissue paper to try and get as much of that color from the tissue paper up onto the stamp. And if you've ever watercolored with a stamp or put a marker on top of a stamp, especially like a Tombow or something, and then spritzed it, it's kind of the same thing. It doesn't show up real great, but I went ahead and I dried this with my heat tool and then used my VersaFine Onyx Black ink and stamped up that same stamped image over all three of the watermarks. And it just brought out the color of the heart and gave it a little more definition. I also took some of the excess tissue paper color and splattered the card. For this next background, I am using a piece of Arteza watercolor paper, which I'm going to take my sprayer and spray with water. And then I've just taken several different colors of pink and blue, and I'm just going to take those pieces of tissue paper, and spread across my card panel, and then I will spritz the panel again. And then I'm just going to move it around and let a little bit of that color bleed out, and then help that dry a little bit with my heat tool. And then I'll pull that tissue paper off and use my heat tool again. I think it gives a really cool, almost like a galaxy background without the dark. And then I did take some shimmer spray and spray that, and it reacted. So you'll have kind of like the reaction you get with the Distress Oxide, where it pulls up that water. And then I did 2 card panels with embossing folders, and I don't know what happened to the footage with that. So that's what that green one is. But here's just kind of an overview of the blank panels before I turn them into cards. And then I have another embossed image that I apparently don't show here, but and then here are the 2 rainbow watercolor images. There it is. So I did emboss 2 card panels and use the tissue paper, but I apologize. I don't know what happened to the footage for that. So for this first card, I'm going to go ahead and use the waffle flower die that's called Sweet Scallops, along with the waffle flower Fresh Rainbow stamp set. And I've taken the watercolor panel and used that scallop die. I've also taken a piece of cardstock and used an embossing folder, which I don't know what embossing folder that is. I apologize. And I've adhered that to my card base. And then I'm going to go ahead and take some 1/8 inch foam strips behind the die cut rainbow and adhere that. And then I also use a little bit of some Dress My Craft rainbow candies and adhere those to the card. For this next card, I'm using a blue card base, and this is the floral watercolor card. And I've just taken some double-sided adhesive and adhered that to my card base, and used a sentiment from Penny Black's stamp set called Love Language. And then I also added some Nuvo drops, went kind of crazy with the Nuvo drops. Sometimes I'm just never sure like how many sequins or how many drops to put, and sometimes like this one a little overboard, but that's okay. So for this next panel, I went ahead and splattered it with some black paint and some white, and then I used this die from Tonic, exclusive to scrapbook.com, called Hold On to Your Dreams. And that was really a quick and easy card to put together. For this next card, this was the solid background. I'm using a stamp set by Kaisercraft called Everlasting for the floral part. The sentiment is from a Kaisercraft stamp set called Magenta. And I've just heat embossed that sentiment and floral onto the panel and taken some white gouache, I believe, and splattered that. And for the heart panel, I just took my double-sided adhesive or my adhesive roller and adhered that to my card base. And then the stamp set that I used for the XOs and the word U is from Ranger, and it's called Loves. And then I'm just taking some sequins and adding those. Really quick to put together card. All of these are really pretty much quick to put together, actually. So here's the next watercolor card, the one that's a little more loose. I've taken a Stamp Market stamp set called With Love and white embossed that, and then I've the hearts come in that stamp set as well, and I stamped those up with VersaFine Clair and Purple Delight and Charming Pink, and again took my white gouache and splattered that onto the card. For the next panel, the one that I had used the mist with, I went ahead and ended up trimming around the floral image and then creating a background using this die from Honeybee Stamps called Watercolor Lines. And so I went ahead and adhered that in the background and placed that spritzed image on top along with the word amazing, which is a Pink Fresh Studios word die. Sorry about that. I lost my thought. And I added some sequins, and that completed that card. For this next card, this is using the florals that I used with the die. I'm using this ornate oval frame from Pink Fresh Studios. And for the die, I went ahead and I left one full floral piece, and then I trimmed around the rest so that I could layer them on top of each other. And so the second one is a little bit smaller than the original, and then the third piece that goes on top is a little bit smaller so that you can see those layers. So I'm just adhering all of the pieces, the leaves and the frame, and then the pop-up pieces, I am using a piece of foam tape behind those. And then I added the sentiment, your kindness is appreciated, and a few gems around the frame. And that will complete that card. And then this card, I, for some reason, left it out of my final walkthrough of the cards. So this is the one with the shimmer and all of the color on it. I'm using a Trinity Stamps called Awesome Human. I did a lot to this. I think I overkilled it a little bit. But yeah, so I basically just framed out that piece. I thought it was had too much color, and I was trying to fix it, but it didn't work. So this is how it turned out. I used some splatter and some drops. And then for the next card, this is one of the cards that I used an embossing folder with that I lost the original footage to. I'm using some out to new tall alpha dies, and I've cut out the letters to spell the word lucky. And to get those centered straight on my card, I'm using this lettering guide. I have never used this lettering guide before. I bought it because I wanted to learn or practice how to hand letter. And I thought it'd be good for doing really like precise, neat lettering. And I've never used it before, and I saw it sitting there. And I thought it would be perfect to line up these die cuts, and it worked really well. So I'm super happy with how it turned out. And then the sentiment is, I am so very lucky to have a friend like you. And then I also have another card when I show the preview of all the cards, it says hang in there. It's also a card that I used with an embossing folder for some reason. I don't have that footage. I don't know if I forgot to record or what, but here's a preview of a review of all of the cards that were created. I had a lot of fun with this. It just goes to show that when you clean out your craft room, you find all kinds of stuff that you've purchased and maybe never used or rarely used. And it also shows the potential of things that we have that we buy that you can use in so many different ways, not just for cards, but for other crafts as well. And like I said earlier, I think this is a great project to, even put on canvas or put on watercolor paper and frame it to do with your kids and your grandkids, to make as a gift for a family member, or maybe a piece of artwork that you can hang up in your house. So I love this video. I hope you enjoyed it as well. If you did like this video or find it informative, please go ahead and give me a thumbs up. As always, if you are not subscribed and you would like to subscribe, please go ahead and hit that red subscribe button. And until next time, have a great day, and I'll catch you later.